Welcome back to the module for your online grant training about grant budgeting basics. In our final section of this module, we'll be talking about the financial stability and sustainability that your grant makers may be asking you about in your budget or in your budget justification. When we think about what it means to be stable, to have diverse funding sources, to be sustainable, this has a different type of importance and meaning for many different grant makers. If we're thinking about foundations, often what they're looking for is a diversity of funding sources so that you don't become reliant on one specific grant maker. So foundations are often worried about, are you going to come back to us year after year asking about another grant? In other scenarios with government funders, they're wondering about, will you be decreasing your dependence on government funds and increasing your revenue in another way so that a program could continue? That's the sort of example that's on the screen. This is like the chart that we saw when we looked at our budget justifications. We could see a decreasing request amount for the government funding over each of the 5 years. The reason being that there would be an increasing level of support from other funding sources, other revenue streams. So the dependence on the government funding was decreasing. When we look at the government budget forms in particular, when we look at the types of expenses that they're supporting, when we think about what it is that they're going to fund, the big question we have to ask ourselves isn't actually about the expenses that we're going to document, but rather, what is our forecasted cash need in the future, and what is the purpose of this government funding? Do we think that we need equal support each quarter in the first year? Do we need additional years of funding support? What is the program designed to do? Is it designed to provide stable funding for multiple years? Maybe it's meant to be a 3-year grant program. Therefore, we would expect stable cash requests over each quarter and stable requests over each of the subsequent years. But what should happen to the project or program after the funding runs out, after the program is over? Is the intent that you apply for another multi-year grant from that federal agency? That might be an example in something like a Head Start program, where the government funds in the same communities often over and over. Or is it meant to be a 3-year validation grant, proving that something works? And once it's done, the sustainability isn't about continuing the project or program, but rather the sustainability is about taking the ideas, the knowledge, and sharing it with others. Maybe now moving on to something like a scale-up grant, taking what was validated and scaling the ideas, the knowledge, the implementation to other communities, to other organizations. So when we think about stability and sustainability, we need to think about which grant maker are we looking at? What is their definition for stability, for grant dependence or not, and for sustainability? Each grant program might have a different approach to what this will look like in your grant budget forms, your budget justification and narrative, and maybe even in some of the narrative questions you might be faced with, in particular with foundations in perhaps an online portal. This will play out across different applications in different ways, and therefore my big statement is it will depend on the application for what it looks like and what it sounds like. But I want you to be aware that it's the closing loop related to your budget. It's not just about the one single year, but it's about the larger award period and beyond. So ask questions. Think about what it means to each grant maker, and if you have questions after that, reach out and ask us. There's a lot of different ways that you can ask questions about the budget information that we've covered in this module. And definitely, at a minimum, don't forget that you can always reach out over email. You can find me at Diane at dhleonardconsulting.com, where I'll be able to answer any questions you have about sustainability and ongoing funding, how you answer that in your budget forms, or anything else that we've covered in this budget module. I want to remind you that these online grant training modules are provided with the generous support of numerous grant funders. And so thank you to those organizations for providing the grant funding that made these trainings possible.